So getting stuck into my first classic motorbike rebuild has been a massive learning curve so far. Of course, I'm learning all of the usual lessons, that everything takes far longer, costs far more money, and is often far, far harder than first expected. But to be honest, I was kind of ready for those lessons to some extent. At the moment, I'm getting ready to get the engine, the gearbox, the final drive, and the suspension all completely rebuilt. So in the next 8 weeks or so, all of that critical work is going to get done. And then we should be in a position to start getting the bike back together. Now, the aim of this build has always been to create a reliable yet classic touring bike capable of big, comfortable miles here in the UK and across Europe. And some great progress has been made so far. My carburetors are done. Just look at how amazing these are. These have been completely rebuilt. They've been vapor blasted as well. And more on this in a second, but I've also got my paint back as well. And that's always a big moment. And I've got to say, I'm rather happy with how this turned out. So this video is not really about all of that stuff. It's actually about one of the biggest challenges in this build, one that I really wasn't expecting. And that is this kind of eternal dilemma to take the bike back to stock or not. Now, when I went into this build, I did have a broad plan to stick to stock. But I've got to be honest and tell you that things are starting to wander slightly, and I have found myself dealing with a difficult balancing act of improving things or personalizing things and trying to stay true to my initial vision of getting this bike back to OEM. So in this video, we'll ask the question, how important is stock on a bike like the R100CS? And I'll fill you in on some of the difficult decisions that I've made so far, and of course, some of the choices that I'm still yet to make. So in the world of classic motorbike restoration, using the word restoration is quite an important word, because if you're doing that, you should be really returning your bike back to stock. There really isn't much room for creative license. There's no room for making improvements. You've got to get back to original. That's really the main principle of a restoration in the purest form. On the other side of the equation, of course, you've got custom builders who love to take old bikes and deliberately use them as a canvas to create something entirely new. And in that process, anything goes. Frames get cut, engines get bored out, forks get upgraded, tyres often get knobbly, and, well, tanks get glitter. You name it, anything is possible in that scene. And then representing this massive grey area in between those two extremes, we have what some people are calling the Resto Mod. Now, the idea is that you respectfully stick to the principles of the original bike while kind of releasing the shackles of a pure restoration and allowing for some sympathetic performance and or aesthetic upgrades at your discretion. So some of these Resto Mods, of course, lean more towards a pure restoration, whilst others lean more towards the custom scene, retaining the silhouette of the bike but making multiple upgrades across the piece. Now, personally, it's my belief that if you're working on a historically important bike, say you had an R90S, an original R90S, really, you probably shouldn't mess with it. It's a piece of motorcycling history, it's iconic, and it deserves to be preserved in that form. However, a bike like my R100CS, yep, it's a rare bike, but not making any more. In fact, it's probably rarer than an R90S, but it's not really a historically important bike. It didn't really represent any big benchmarks in history. And as such, I have decided to slightly release the shackles a little bit, loosen up and allow for a couple of little upgrades here and there and modifications, rather than purely sticking religiously to getting this bike to OEM. Now, I have struggled with this. I haven't taken these decisions lightly because I really do want to respect the original bike. I don't want to end up with some kind of dog's dinner. Ultimately, I do want to put it back on the road and use this on a regular basis as a reliable, classic two-up sports tourer. But with all the time and the money that I'm putting into it, I also want to add just a few little personal touches and a few little upgrades to make it what I believe to be a better bike along the way. So take, for example, the paintwork. Now, when I got the bike, you might remember one of the first videos I uploaded where it was rocking this R100CS homage scheme. Now, I wasn't sure what this was when I first got the bike. I wasn't that clued up on the whole thing. I thought it might be original paint, but it definitely wasn't. It was somewhat kind of DIY style replica of the original black and silver TT paint. And I've got to say, you know, standing 10 feet back and taking a look at it, it was pretty good. But it was only when you got up close that you realised it wasn't particularly well done. And, you know, things like the airbrushing was a little bit dodgy, and the gold pinstripe wasn't really a pinstripe, it was just gold tape that somebody had lacquered over. But more to the point, it was also totally wrong for the R100CS. So this is what I've done. This is my take on the R100CS paint scheme. I went through the archives, I worked out as best I could things like the dimensions for the gold pinstriping. We've got a 3.8mm outer line here on the tank with a 2mm gap, and then a 2mm inner line. Then on all the other parts, we've got 2mm double lines across things like the seat pan and the rear cowl. Also on the front fairing as well. Looks absolutely brilliant with that double gold pinstripe on the paints here. The only thing that I believe didn't have a double gold pinstripe was the front mudguard, from what I've seen in the archives. But I've seen so many different variations, it's actually been quite hard to figure out exactly what to do. So I think I've got it right, but I'm sure somebody will let me know in the comments if I haven't, but I did do my best. Now, there is one part of this paint job that is completely wrong, and 10 out of 10 if you've spotted it so far. The black. This black never existed on an original R100CS. The black that BMW gave us back in the 80s was a metallic black. And it just so happens that metallic black is one of my least favourite paints of all. Not that I really think too much about what my favourite paints are, but out of all of them, metallic black for me is just one of those paints that can't really make its mind up. 1 minute it's kind of black, then it's kind of grey, silver, then it kind of has these browny, muddy, greeny tones to it. I just don't like it. So when I was thinking about going back to original or not, I just didn't want to go back to metallic black. So what I've done is gone for this deep, inky, solid, glossy, classic black. It's just a solid black. It's absolutely beautiful. Now, I haven't polished this stuff up properly yet. It's literally fresh out of the booth. But when this is done, when this is properly finished, you are going to be able to see your soul in this black. It is the darkest black I think I've ever seen. It's beautifully simple. It's absolutely timeless. And with the simplicity of that double gold pinstripe, it just pops in a way that I think metallic kind of doesn't. So for me personally, the sparkly stuff can stay back in the 1980s where it belongs, and I'm more than happy to give this bike a bit more of a timeless classic look with a solid black paint job. Elsewhere on the petrol tank and on the rear cowl, I'm going to do another little small OEM upgrade. I'm going to get rid of these horrendous fake BMW plastic badges that the previous owner has used. These are just on there as placeholders for now to give you an idea of how things might look. But what I've actually got are these beautiful handmade enamel BMW badges. Now, these are not going to be, strictly speaking, period correct for a 1980s BMW, because I think by the time we got to the 1980s, BMW were using a metal-backed but still plastic badge. Looks quite nice, quite good, but not a patch on how they used to be way back in the day when they were properly enameling these badges. So that is what these are. I need to get some adhesive backing to get these mounted up on the tank, and I'm going to do it all once the tank's on the bike and everything's properly sprung so we can see where the kind of natural horizon should be and all that stuff. But again, another little deviation just to add another little classic touch to this bike, and something that I think is just going to make it look a lot better than it was when it came from the factory. So there you go, little choices there to improve the look and feel ever so slightly. Elsewhere, another example of a small change is the top yoke that I'm going with. So this is a CNC milled piece of aluminium from a company called Toaster Tan out in the USA. And the idea is that it is a lot more sturdy than this. This is the rather thin stamped steel plate that you get from BMW. Now, the idea of the Toaster Tan piece is that it's a beefed up version of that plate really with the idea to help stiffen up the forks and improve handling. And you can see just how much more of the stanchion is going to be gripped by this plate versus the stocker. Now, it was a very common mod back in the day, so it does have some kind of provenance to it. It's not uncommon at all to see these plates installed on a great many classic Airheads. Now, I don't know how effective it's going to be. I've not tried it. But anecdotally, there is quite a lot of good sentiment around for this upgrade when it comes to performance and handling. So my hope is that this plate, along with the new steering bearings and getting that preload just right down on that top nut, is going to get rid of a lot of that head shake that I was seeing at around 40 miles an hour. It was a little bit disconcerting, so hopefully we can eliminate that. But I've got to be completely honest, putting performance aside, I've also got to admit that I do rather love the look of this piece too. It is incredibly well made. And alongside some nice bar clamps up here with some nice new shiny fairing brackets, also brand new chrome handlebars, it's going to look absolutely beautiful. I'm going to ditch the OEM crash pad that you can see in these shots. So it's going to be a slightly different look and feel up on the bars to the original setup. But personally, I think it's going to kind of lean into that fighter jet style cockpit. It's industrial, it's purposeful, and it all exists for a good reason. With these slightly flimsy 36mm forks, anything to add a little bit more rigidity is always going to be a good thing. So we'll have to try it and see, but that's an upgrade that I'm planning to do to the bike as well. Also, little things like this top nut. This is handmade. It's been machined with a slightly wider skirt to apply a better clamping force onto the top plate. And again, it's not OEM, but it is a thing of beauty. Elsewhere on the bike, the brake discs are also going to get an upgrade. These are the EBC ProLite floating discs. Now, the period correct discs on the R100 are these solid rotors from Brembo. They've got really nice classic looks to them, and I've got to be honest, they've got classic performance to match. The main issue with these is their tendency to distort over time. And when I first got the bike, one of the first test rides I did, I was quite disconcerted to find one of these discs was quite badly warped, giving me a bit of a nasty pulse through the lever. So of course they need to be replaced. And these EBC discs, you know, they look a lot more modern because they are, but really the main reason for them being on the bike is to help with better heat management. The fact that they are floating rotors means they are far less likely to warp and should give us a little bit more stopping performance as well. So again, we'll have to wait and see just how effective they are. They are not period correct. They don't have quite the same classic look as those Brembo solid discs, but I think the reasons for putting these on the bike are pretty obvious. Elsewhere on the bike, I still need to work out what to do with things like the horns. Now, the horns on this machine are absolutely wonderful. They sound fantastic, but I really can't stand the look of them. These two big ugly things on the side of the frame, not really my cup of tea. And there is actually an opportunity when I send the frame off to get powder coated and get it back, you know, before I put everything together, I reckon I can get a horn mounted on this little crossbar up here, which would be a much more incognito place to put it. And hopefully with modern technology, I'll be able to find something just as loud as those two air horns that were originally put on the side of the bike. Very small thing. It's non-OEM, I know, but for me, just kind of cleans up the lines of the bike. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the video, before this bike goes back together, I'm going to be doing a full rebuild of the engine, the gearbox, and the final drive. And this, of course, gives me an opportunity to have these cases blasted back to gorgeous, clean aluminium. And of course, this also presents an opportunity, perhaps the most controversial change of all. I'm thinking about having all of these cases Cerakoted or painted black. Now, hear me out. To me, these bikes are all about being ridden, out on the road, in all weathers, chomping through big miles. The problem that I see with a lot of these bikes is that they all look kind of scruffy pretty quickly, and I put a lot of that down to the fact that the engine mass and the transmission and all that makes up so much of the kind of aesthetic of this bike. And because it's that kind of satiny aluminium, it just seems to turn this filthy, dirty grey almost immediately. It kind of sucks up dirt. You get this kind of brown, stained grey look, kind of corroded as well. And it's, for me, not the most attractive thing in the world. Keeping it clean, of course, is going to be a right pain, something that I don't want to have to keep worrying about. So one option is to get it all blasted back to nice clear aluminium and then apply a clear Cerakote to everything, just to give it a little bit more protection and make it a little bit easier to clean. Or, as I said, I could go black, because being completely honest, looking at what some of the custom builders have done with these bikes with black engines, yeah, they look pretty tasty, especially if you go ahead and you get all the fins polished up and things like that. So that might be one way of adding a little bit of extra protection, cutting back on some of the ongoing maintenance and giving the bike a little bit more of a modern look and feel. And a lot of modern bikes, like my Indian Scout, for example, really kind of rock that blacked out engine look with a little bit of chrome here and there, a little bit of shiny stuff. It's just a really nice look. A lot of the Triumphs and things like that, you know, kind of black engines now. So it's just one option that I'm yet to decide on. I did actually put a poll up on the channel. I'm that kind of torn on this to see what people think. And I was actually surprised that most people suggested going with black over raw aluminium. So stick a comment down below and let me know what you think of that, because I haven't done it yet. No commitments have been made. I'll probably end up sticking with aluminium and being boring, to be honest. But anyway, it's something that's just tempting me. We'll have to see how we get on with that. So these are just some of the things that I'm toying with at the moment. And of course, the most important thing is to get this bike mechanically tip-top so that it can go out and enjoy another 40 years and many more tens of thousands of miles out there on the road. And that really is my priority for this bike. But I do want to add a few little personal touches along the way. So this video is really about just kind of offloading and really getting your thoughts on some of that stuff as well, because sometimes when you're just doing this stuff alone, you can't really see the wood for the trees, and it's kind of difficult to know if you're doing the right thing or not. And I'm new to this, so I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm giving it my best shot and I'm learning a lot and I'm having a lot of fun. But what I will say is, to anybody getting stuck into these projects, you know, you see those videos out on YouTube, those beautiful time lapses and heavily edited films of professional builders putting stuff together. The reality of actually getting stuck in and doing it is very, very different. You know, it is a big financial commitment, one that doesn't really make a lot of sense, to be honest. It's a big time commitment. It's a big headspace commitment. Yeah, it really does consume a huge part of your life. And I can see clearly why a lot of projects get probably about to this stage and just fall flat on their face, because people get demotivated, people run out of money, people run out of patience. So I'm trying to keep myself infused by enjoying things like that moment when new paint arrives and new carburetors turn up and shiny stuff starts coming through the post. You know, those are little things that can just keep that spring in your step as you work through what is probably the project's darkest hour at the moment. There isn't a huge amount of light at the end of a tunnel, but I do know if I keep fighting and keep pushing, we will get through this, and come spring, summertime, hopefully we'll be out there on the open road enjoying a wonderfully restored classic motorcycle and giving it a new lease of life. So there is a lot to look forward to. Anyway, love to know what you think down in the comments below. And until the next one, ride safe.